Thank you, Winston, for inviting me to speak, and thank you, Mr. Luddy, for allowing all of this to happen. It's a very hard thing to follow up everything that's been said, especially given the subject matter of what I'm talking about, which is stories. So I'm going to begin with a story. "Who are you?" asked Pinocchio. "I am the ghost of the talking cricket," was the reply in a low, low voice, so faint that it seemed to come from another world. "What do you want from me?" said the marionette. "I want to give you some advice. Go back home and carry the 4 gold pieces you have left to your poor father, who is weeping and longing for you. But tomorrow my father will be a rich gentleman, for these gold pieces will have become 2,000. My boy, never trust people who promise to make you rich in a day. They are generally crazy swindlers. Listen to me and go back home." "No, on the contrary, I'm going forward." "It's very late." "No, I'm going forward." "The night is dark." "I'm going forward." "It's a dangerous road." "I am going forward." The cricket then said one last time, "Remember, Pinocchio, that children who do as they please and want to have their own way are sorry for it sooner or later." That's an old story. Good night, cricket. Good night, Pinocchio. May heaven preserve you from dangers and assassins. And with these words, the talking cricket disappeared as suddenly as when you blow out a candle, and the path was darker than it was before. On February 10th, 2024, I was blessed to welcome my son, Noah Palmer, into the world. From hearing his heartbeat through ultrasound waves to seeing the outline of his tiny face, nothing compared to holding him for the very first time. Over the last couple of months, I've enjoyed almost every second with my son. Seeing him develop his own personality, hearing his laugh, watching him attempt to crawl, has made me unbelievably grateful for what the future holds. Deep down, however, there is a part of me that's already begun bracing for pain. While Noah cannot lie right now, I know that one day he will lie to my face. Because children are natural liars. They're not intentionally taught deception by their parents. More often than not, parents do attempt to teach their children the difference between untruth and truth. But nature says otherwise. Children are comfortable with lies. They lie to get out of trouble, they lie to get what they want, and sometimes they just lie to lie, such as Carlo Collodi's puppet, Pinocchio. His routine presence before diverging narrative paths provides readers with clear outcomes connected to specific choices. Pinocchio might choose what seems appealing in the moment, but leads to destruction, or he might choose the path that proves true and good in the long run, but initially appears uncomfortable and challenging. Adults will notice when reading the story that Pinocchio is the archetypal young boy, because he time after time makes the wrong choice. Whether trusting a pair of shifty strangers like the fox and the cat, or visiting playland with countless other ignorant boys with the intention of amusing themselves from morning till night, only to be turned into donkeys, Collodi's message to adults is clear. Pinocchio, like practically all young boys, routinely makes an ass of himself. Our protagonist is not left defenseless against the constant onslaught of charlatans, thieves, and other unsavory characters, however. Throughout the story, Pinocchio does receive guidance and instruction from teachers, wielding greater powers of perception and understanding, combining childlike wonder with the wisdom that comes from experience. Geppetto, the fairy, the talking cricket, each attempts to teach Pinocchio how to behave properly, and most importantly, how to live in truth. Geppetto loves his creation by clothing him, buying him a primer, and never losing hope that Pinocchio will return home. The fairy loves the puppet in spite of his lies by forcing him to face the consequences of his actions before demonstrating grace and forgiveness. And the cricket loves Pinocchio enough to provide him with sage wisdom regardless of whether the foolish puppet listens or not. Now, Collodi shows that these teachers are rarely successful in initially deterring the imprudent student from making foolish choices. But the key is that the adults always hold tightly onto the hope that he will, and they never stop trying to save him. So from this story, we learned that teaching is, by nature, a moral, character-shaping endeavor. Teaching is the process of soulcraft, by which a teacher attempts to instill virtue within another human being so that he might live a good life. If teaching is this art of soulcraft, then that means that something of ultimate significance occurs between teachers and their students. Good teachers quite literally change their students by cultivating within them what the Greeks called kalokagathia, which is essentially we don't have a very good English translation for this, but it's basically a concept where both the beautiful and the good are harmoniously combined within man. Now, can that same significance be said to the teaching duty of just imparting knowledge, content? Well, master teachers like Plato, Jesus, Augustine, Aquinas, and others consistently stressed the primacy of moral formation over rote learning. And they agreed on this point because they all understood the nature of knowledge itself. Bacon had said knowledge is power, but knowledge is not intrinsically good. Data, facts, figures are tools at the end of the day, and they can be used either for good or they can be used for something else entirely. When I was studying history and philosophy of education in college, I became exposed to this following letter from a Holocaust survivor. The letter was specifically addressed not to politicians, not to doctors, not even to lawyers, but to teachers. And so the note, it's very short, reads as follows. Dear teacher, I am a survivor of a concentration camp. My eyes saw what no man should ever witness. Gas chambers built by learned engineers. Children poisoned by educated physicians. Infants killed by trained nurses. Women and babies shot and burned by high school and college graduates. So I am suspicious of education. My request is help your students to become human. Your efforts must never produce learned monsters, skilled psychopaths, educated Eichmanns. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are important only if they serve to make our children more humane. And so every time I read this letter, my heart chills because I can practically hear that faceless author screaming and pleading with teachers to never let what happened happen again. His words bite like a sharp knife as he throws one of the greatest tragedies in world history at the feet of teachers who, whether through ignorance or cowardice or even both, failed to address the moral needs of their students. And so as the letter pleads, education cannot be solely concerned with transmitting knowledge because history remembers what the consequences of that looks like. Teaching must be conceived as the art of soulcraft because that means educators have a responsibility to instruct students in loving the good and hating the detestable. So that question then becomes, how do teachers do this? And the answer is fairly straightforward, but more difficult in practice, with intentionality at the helm and the imagination as its rudder. Teachers must understand that soulcraft informs forming a child's moral imagination. This phrase was first coined by the Anglo-Irish statesman Edmund Burke in 1790, and it demands explanation. Because when I say the word imagination, that word repulses a lot of adults because they associate it with things like Disney sing-alongs and cartoons and childish stuff. Certainly nothing mature, right? There are two ironies to be noticed here. First, adults who think that way forget who wrote children's stories in the first place. And second, consider that selection I read to you from Collodi's Pinocchio. When a human being reads the conversation between a puppet and a cricket, Images begin forming before the mind's eye. And it's this phenomenon that's the very essence of man's fantastical ability to conjure up mental images without the use of any other sense. It's basically our superpower. When human beings desire something, they actively think and imagine the thing that it is that they want. And while we would like to believe that reason governs our actions, reality often says otherwise. More often than not, human beings are led by their desires, which are in turn directed by the imagination. Plato described this idea in his Phaedrus with the analogy of a charioteer attempting to control two horses. Horses, like human desires, are powerful, often unpredictable, easily excitable. So when reason inevitably tires at the tugging reins, those passionate stallions take over, and they then control the controller. Because Plato understood this truth, he advocated for a moral education that would bring up children in such a way that they would fall in love with virtue and hate vice. In his Republic, one of the ways Plato does this with his interlocutors is with complex stories, requiring his friends to visualize the meaning of his words to get at the root of the lesson. Introducing the Ring of Gyges, a short but incredible story that provides the formidable philosophical antithesis to Socrates' initial defense of justice in Book 1. So if you're not familiar with the plot, I'll give you a short summary. So there's this guy named Glaucon, one of Socrates' interlocutors, and he raises this very provocative argument in Book 2. He says, no one actually prefers justice over injustice. That's just a lie that we tell ourselves. Justice is actually a social convention used to maintain order and protect weak people. Men, we just pretend to admire it because it allows us to enjoy all the amenities, or as Plato would say, the relishes of daily life. So Glaucon argues, we actually all deep down inside us, if we're being truly honest, we prefer injustice. Because if there was no possibility of any negative repercussions, you would not hesitate to do whatever it is that you want on a daily basis. And so to prove this theory, Glaucon tells us of a nameless man who in the countryside, he happens across a ring of great power. And if turned ever so slightly on his finger, the ring turns the man invisible. Does the man use his newfound power to fight crime, to rescue the weak, to destroy the nation's enemies? No. Instead, Plato writes, as soon as the man realized what the ring did, he arranged to become one of the messengers sent to report to the king, and on arriving there, he seduced the king's wife, attacked the king with her help, and then killed him, and then took over the kingdom. So without a moment's hesitation or second thought, the man uses godlike power to satisfy himself. And Glaucon wagers, he even goes further, he's taunting Socrates. If there were two rings and you gave one of them to a supposed just man, right, bring out the best you got, he would become inevitably corrupted by that power because he would be imagining a better life that he could use that ring for. So when Glaucon concludes this argument, I always imagine him giving Socrates this triumphantly taunting look as if to say, well, what say you, Socrates? How are you going to defeat this? And as it turns out, it takes Socrates the rest of the Republic to respond to Glaucon. That is how powerful that argument is. So when I teach this story to my students, I give them that same question. And almost instantly, the class becomes hyper-fixated on one of the most profound debates ever raised by ancient philosophy. This perfectly encapsulates what Plato did, what it means to engage in soulcraft. Unlike a college lecturer or even a high school teacher from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, who summarizes the main points of a lesson by telling students, this is the lesson to be learned, Plato elevates the structure used by the fabulist Aesop by challenging readers to question, do absolute standards of morality exist? Why is virtue actually preferable over vice, despite the temptations offered by the pleasurable life? All of these questions are worth engaging our students in. And so whether you teach in the humanities or sciences, teachers have to internalize their calling as cultivators of students' characters. But sometimes this can be really difficult, I get it, because Today's teachers were so swamped by the tsunami of bureaucracy and education that sometimes it becomes too easy to miss the forest for the trees. And I taught in public school for 3 years, so I mean, yeah. And as a teacher myself, I've undergone times when it felt like nothing I was doing in the classroom made any difference. A couple of years ago, I had a conversation with one of my former professors, and I vocalized this concern, and I asked for his advice. Dr. Richard Gamble, a professor of history at Hillsdale College, he looked at me and with his characteristic smile said, "You're worried about the wrong thing. The problem is not that you have little to no influence. You should actually be terrified by how much influence you have over your students. You have no idea what effect you will have on them, not just in the present moment, let alone 10 or 20 years into the future. That's what should keep you up at night." And so when framed that way, our mission as teachers becomes even harder and more daunting and consequently more significant. Like Pinocchio's teachers, we're not always going to get it right initially. But we have to remember that in all moments, our attitude can make all the difference in the world to our students. If we say something incorrect in class, we have to acknowledge our mistake. I was wrong, right? Because we can't expect students to just through osmosis figure out how to do that, right, as adults. If our students are engaging in inappropriate behavior, it's our moral responsibility to correct those choices and redirect towards virtue. And, personal favorite, if we're approached by a student at the very end of transition, and he then asks difficult metaphysical questions like, what does it mean to be happy? We shouldn't shy away from that. There's a time for that, not right now, but we should embrace that challenge when it comes, because those are the opportunities to make meaningful, good impacts in children's lives that will pretty much undoubtedly exist or extend beyond the present. But I have to end with a word of caution. While there are many well-intentioned teachers in the world, not all of us are indoctrinators, there are some who fully do understand the significance of their role as cultivators of characters. I think many of the other speakers have identified or talked about those people. Those people intentionally abuse the power that they have been given to lead students down paths of destruction. When teaching his disciples, Jesus expressed rage at such individuals by saying, "There will always be temptations to sin, but what sorrow awaits the person who does the tempting? It would be better to be thrown into the sea with a millstone hung around your neck than to cause one of these little ones to fall into sin." And it doesn't matter if you're religious or not. Jesus was a model teacher in the Western heritage whose lessons and actions complemented each other as best they possibly could in our world. He didn't see children as pawns to be used in some sort of societal game or for some political agenda. He saw children as possessing infinite value, worthy of love and grace. Many of his parables talk about this in great detail, 3 of which could be directly applied to teaching as soulcraft if I had another hour. But these include the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, and of course, probably the best, I think Charles Dickens is on record saying the greatest short story ever uttered, the parable of the prodigal son. Together, they proclaim the shared theme of finding something that is lost and rescuing that person from a life of destruction, just like what happens to Pinocchio when he joyfully rediscovers his father in the belly of the whale, like Jonah, near the conclusion of his journey towards moral formation. So how many of us teachers have been blessed to have students that are lost, but are in a position where we could help them to be found and learn to be better? How many of us will go that extra mile to care not just for the academic needs, but a child's moral formation as well? To follow in those footsteps is to engage in soulcraft, which is the heritage of the West and the embodiment of what true education is all about. Thank you.